So, welcome to On the Park Bench, a public square conversation brought to you by the Congress for the New Urbanism. On the Park Bench presents interactive conversations with thought leaders in new urbanism and allied fields related to the built environment. And today we have an author's forum on the book Killed by a Traffic Engineer with author Wes Marshall. And the interviewer moderator is myself, Robert Steuteville. So share your thoughts on hashtag On the Park Bench. And join us for an upcoming webinar next week, Saving Our Vanishing Third Places, same time, same place. Go to cnu.org/resources/on-the-park-bench to sign up for that. And I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. Wes Marshall is a professor of civil engineering at the University of Colorado, Denver, where he holds a joint appointment in urban planning. Wes is a licensed professional engineer and focuses on transportation teaching and research dedicated to creating safer and more sustainable transportation systems. A prolific writer, Wes has more than 80 peer-reviewed journal publications and book chapters. He is a native of a walkable city, Watertown, Massachusetts, which helped to form his professional focus and worldview. He studied under Norman Garrick, a new urbanist transportation engineer who's well known at the University of Connecticut. And I'm Rob Steuteville, editor of CNU's Public Square. Killed by a Traffic Engineer, Shattering the Delusion that Science Underlies Our Transportation System. It's a very ambitious book that is already getting a lot of attention. Somebody, not me, posted it to my neighborhood email listserv, which rarely happens for a book of any kind, let alone a book on transportation. So that's my personal measure of how this book is getting out there beyond people in the planning and transportation fields. So first, we're going to have a presentation by Wes, followed by a brief discussion between myself and Wes, then Q&A from the audience. So please use your Q&A function of Zoom to ask your questions as they occur to you. I'm sure we're going to have a lot of questions today, and we'll get to them one by one. So welcome, Wes Marshall, to On the Park Bench. I'm going to pass this along to you for your presentation.
All righty, thank you very much, Rob. Let me get this up and running here. All right, thank you all for joining. My name is Wes Marshall, and as Rob said, I wrote this book that came out recently, and it's a 400+ page book, so I'm clearly not going to be able to get to sort of everything in it, nor do I want to. Like, I want to sort of save some of the surprising stories in there for when and if you get a chance to read it. So today, I'm going to start here. So I recently presented at the International Making Cities Livable Conference. And while I was putting together that presentation, I thought it'd be fun to ask AI to show me an image of a livable city. And this is what I got. I then asked it to show me what an unlivable city might look like. And this is what I got. You don't have to look hard to figure out what sets these two places apart. And the biggest difference seems to be transportation. Another thing that sets them apart is likely to be road safety. So how big of a road safety problem do we even have? There are a lot of ways I could explain this. One might be to say that I think globally more people die on our roads every single day than died in the 9/11 attacks. In the US, we started collecting this data in 1899. So there were 26 people killed on our roads that year. We hit 100,000 deaths in 1922, 500,000 deaths in 37, 1 million deaths in 1953. By 1960, more Americans had been killed on our roads than had died in all of our wars combined, including the Revolutionary War. We hit 2 million in 1975, 3 million in 1998. And based on my estimates, this data is not out yet, we would have hit 4 million earlier this year. Some people might ask how many of those people are pedestrians. Like, this data isn't, they didn't do a great job of collecting this data in the early days of distinguishing by mode. My estimates around 860,000 of these 4 million deaths are pedestrian. Another 71,000 of those are bicyclists. Combined, I think we're on track to hit a total of 1 million pedestrian and bicyclist deaths within the next decade or so. All right, so how do we fix this? One popular approach has been Vision Zero. You likely already know all about Vision Zero and its history dating back to Sweden in the early 90s. In theory, Vision Zero isn't a slogan or a tagline or even a safety intervention. The idea is that we need to approach road safety in a sort of fundamentally different way, where we treat road safety more like the health impact that it really is. Because after all, dying on the roads is definitely not good for your health. So Denver is one of the cities that jumped on board, as did a lot of other ones. Is it working? Well, if you ask an engineer this question, they might show you a graph like this. This is road fatalities per 100 million vehicle miles traveled from 1900 or so. I think 1908 is the earliest year I did this for, up to now. And they might say this. But if we treat road safety like a health impact, like we sort of should with Division Zero, and compare ourselves to, for instance, the other OECD countries, here we're looking at road fatalities per 100,000 population. We aren't doing nearly as well. And if you look at things at the city level, we just hit the 10-year mark, the 10-year anniversary of New York City adopting Vision Zero, and the results of a recent report, here's the big takeaway. Similar things can be said about other places like Portland, Oregon, where not only has the Portland region failed to meet almost all of its goals, in fact, they're heading in the wrong direction since Vision Zero has been implemented. Similar results are shown everywhere else, to the point where Vision Zero is just being deemed a failure. Well, why isn't it working? Make sure my sound works here. All right. Let me start with this. So one of the things I see that's problematic is that traffic engineers are just simply measuring the wrong thing. Let me give you an example. Like here are these two places. Let's say both of them have 8 fatalities. VMT is the vehicle miles traveled, so that's the denominator in our crash rate. So fatalities per VMT, or per million VMT in this case. And if you look at this, what does it tell you? Well, it tells you that the place we see in the top is twice as safe as the place on the bottom. And if you do it like any other health impact, you do it per population, you can see you might get completely different results. And it seems so obvious that, where would you rather want to live? You'd rather live in the place at the bottom. Like, you are safer as a person. But traffic engineers are still entirely focused on the first set of rates. But most humans would define safety very differently. One of the things I try to do in my book was not just point out all the wrong things that traffic engineers are doing and tell them how to do it better. I really wanted to understand why we do what we do. So I dove down like dozens of different rabbit holes, trying to kind of figure out the origin stories. Down one of these rabbit holes, I found this guy, Paul Hoffman. He was known as the civic leader of the safety movement. And prior to becoming this so-called civic leader of the safety movement, Paul was the CEO of the car company Studebaker. In the mid-30s, Paul wasn't that happy that cars were being made to look unsafe. If you've read L.J. Auerbach's super useful book, I think I have it right here, the History of Street Networks, he looked at this a little bit. And he found, Hoffman saying things like he was convinced that publicity about traffic crashes were bad for selling cars. And Hoffman made the right point that traffic engineers need an exposure metric, but he just simply chose the one he liked best that would help make cars look nice and safe for years to come. And then he wrote a book about it. He published this book, 7 Roads to Safety, in 1939. And then he barnstormed the country, selling this new way of measuring safety to a burgeoning new traffic engineering discipline. Not only did we buy what he was selling, but Congress ended up codifying it, I think, in 1966, when they created the first federal road agency on safety. The other reason is that it's not working is that most places, maybe they add a few bike lanes here and there, but they have not fundamentally changed anything they're doing. In other words, many of the cities that declare Vision Zero are just doing the same old under a new catchphrase, which reminds me of this. And that's kind of what we've been doing with Vision Zero in a lot of places. I mean, even nationally, the US DOT and AASHTO adopted their seemingly more pragmatic towards zero death slogan as a national strategy I think this was 2011. And during like this subsequent, what they call the decade of action, all the state DOTs have to submit like their goal for the number of pedestrian bicyclist deaths like the following year. And if you look at the details of those submissions, a lot of them, their goal for the future years was more pedestrian and bicyclist deaths than the previous year. So in other words, we're just doing business as usual under a new umbrella. All right, what should cities be doing? Well, to this day, I see conference presentations at road safety conferences selling this 3E approach to road safety. This is an example of one such presentation. Well, what does that mean? Well, the 3Es stand for engineering, education, enforcement. And it goes back to well before Paul Hoffman's 1939 book. And it kicks off the main editorial in the first issue of the main traffic engineering journal of its time that I looked at a lot to kind of try to get the voices of the traffic engineers from these early days, Traffic Quarterly. And its first editorial in 1947, I mean, they lay it out. The Colonel, Robert Getz, tells us that it all starts with engineering, education, and enforcement. So some people, like Boulder, Colorado, started adding new E's to the pot and heeding the advice of people like Mike Bloomberg, "In God We Trust, everyone else bring data." And the goal is to do what we all think we want. We want to have a more data-driven approach to road safety. So they added a fourth E, evaluation, to the pod, and they dug through their data. And what did they find? Well, they found that most of our crashes are caused by human error. This number comes to us, this 94% number comes to us from a NHTSA report, so the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, where they say that the critical reason for 94% of crashes, plus or minus 2.2%, is related to driver error. Of course, they also say that the critical reason should not be interpreted as the cause of the crash, nor something we use to assign blame, but people still use it to put out graphics like this, where the main takeaway is that we can blame almost all of our road safety problems on the road users themselves. And if human error is the biggest problem, well, what's the solution? Usually the magic elixir is technology. And if you read Peter Norton's new book, you'll see that we have this technological carrot kind of hanging 5 years in front of us all the time, always thinking it's going to save the day from us needing to do anything differently. They've been saying that same thing for decades and decades, and we still aren't that much closer. In fact, a study came out last week where they were saying that self-driving cars are safer except at dawn, at dusk, and whenever they make a turn. And I guess don't get me started on Tesla's so-called self-driving. So while many traffic engineers are happy to wait for technology to save the day, others will go back to our 3Es. And if 90% of our crashes are caused by 90+% are caused by human behavior errors, this implies that 90+% of our solutions need to correct those sort of behaviors. So we focused on these two, the education and the enforcement. Most cities might do something in the enforcement route. For instance, New York City started by cracking down all the jaywalkers and scofflaw cyclists. And they issued actually more tickets to cyclists than truck drivers, even though the year this data comes from, 43 truck drivers killed pedestrians or cyclists, and only one pedestrian was fatally hit by bicyclists. Doesn't mean doesn't happen, but we're sort of putting our eggs in the wrong basket. And when I was putting this together, I noticed that within the last 2 weeks in Cambridge, Mass, these two women were killed by bicyclists, by right-turning trucks in Cambridge, Mass. And this is a city council that just voted to slow down the rollout of their protected bike infrastructure network. Anyways, the problem with enforcement is usually that it's temporary. Things often go back to the status quo. We also have plenty of evidence that racial disparities and enforcement, and way too many examples of police killing minorities during a traffic stop for a minor or invisible infraction. But then you add that to the nearly universal fear that automated camera enforcement is a giant cash grab or a way for Big Brother to start surveilling us. And many agencies instead focus on the lowest hanging fruit, which is education. And that's what Boulder did. When they were doing their Vision Zero, they went through the data, taking a data-driven approach, and they came up with their version of safety as a shared responsibility. And you see similar things from nearly every agency, such as the Colorado DOT with this fun one telling us that as a pedestrian, we need to make eye contact with the driver when crossing the street. The same apparently goes for dogs. And what does this mean for, I think there's 12 million people that are visually impaired and 1.2 people in this country that are blind. What does it mean for them? Well, who knows, but it sure is fun to dress up some CDOT employees in giant eyeball heads and make them cross the street. Like this intersection is actually the one right outside my window here in downtown Denver. And again, what will traffic engineers tell you? Like, well, we did our job. The reality of human error is not that simple. So let me just talk a little bit about what's really behind some of these crashes. So here's an example. Pretend you're on a urban arterial. You're taking a left turn at a permissive green light. So this means that you're looking for a gap in the oncoming traffic. What happens at the same time? We're also telling a pedestrian that it's their turn to walk. We give them the white walk signal. So you're sitting there looking for a gap, trying to get through the intersection. You might have back pressure from other cars. And you do this, you hit a pedestrian. Well, how does this get classified in our crash database? Well, this is a human error problem. This is a problem if the driver didn't yield the right of way to the pedestrian, or maybe the pedestrian didn't yield the right of way to the driver. Whatever it might be, it's a human error problem. So we focus on educating these road users that they should be more careful, right? But I would argue we put both of these people in a bad situation. Like not only in terms of the design of the street, but we know cars have that sort of A-pillar where you can't even see, like the blind spot in your car is exactly where we're telling pedestrians is their turn to cross and cross safely. But the crash ends up as a human error crash and nothing to do with the engineering behind it. Here's another example. This was a crash from Vancouver, Washington a few years ago. I happened to see this crash the morning that it happened, so I ended up spending a lot of the day following what happened. Early morning crash, two boys were walking to school. I think it was 6:30 a.m. They were hit by this pickup truck and they were jaywalking. Here's Taylor and Andrew. They're walking from their house to the school. How does this crash get classified? It's a simple jaywalking crash. The pedestrians did not yield the right of way to this driver. What if we zoom out a little bit and think about the situation that we, as traffic engineers or transportation planners, put them in? Like here's the intersection where they crossed. Where's the nearest crosswalk? Well, it's a quarter mile away. And even if you go to that crosswalk, here's what it's looked like. You're crossing, what, 7 or 8 lanes of traffic with a faded crosswalk. Here's the other one, which isn't much better. Well, what are the sidewalks like between there? I mean, some places they're decent. Other places they're missing. Like here, you can see there's a barrier right there. It's impossible to even walk along this sidewalk. And then at the corners where they have to cross, we have these huge turning radii where you have cars probably turning off that major street pretty quickly. So why did they cross here? Well, it's the rational thing to do. Like they made a rational decision based on the terrible transportation system we put in front of them, but it gets chalked up as a jaywalking crash. And then to add insult to injury, we blame these kids for wearing dark clothing. Like they're high school boys, and it's not like the 1980s where kids are wearing like neon. Of course they're wearing dark clothing. Like we know this about high school kids. Well, what's the problem with this? Well, one, it lets us off the hook, and not off the hook in a good way. It just lets us off the hook from doing anything better. And it also takes away our feedback loop. So we never learn from our mistakes. So yes, there are traffic engineers that are going to make changes to our infrastructure and throw a Band-Aid on things. Throw a Band-Aid here, throw a Band-Aid there. But when you zoom out and look at every city's high injury network, where typically like 50 or 60% of your city's road fatalities or severe injuries take place in only 5 or 6% of your city's streets, those same high injury network streets tend to be our most highly traffic engineered streets. So when you look at what we built, like this is one of them here in Denver, and given all that we know about what makes the streets safe, like while I love my friends and colleagues at CDOT, it's hard to say that it's really safety first. So the way we end up attacking our road safety problems isn't to attack the fundamentals of it, it's to play like whack-a-mole. And given what we built, we don't have enough Band-Aids to fix this problem. And it's really hard to put a Band-Aid on an example like this. Like this is there's no median here, but it's 245 feet from curb to curb for a pedestrian crossing this. So, in 3.5 feet per second, which is our assumption for walking, this would take more than 70 seconds to cross. And this crosswalk comes to us from a new urbanist community in China. All right, and one of the other fundamental issues is that transportation engineering is a subdiscipline of civil engineering. So when I was an undergraduate, I took courses in structural engineering, hydrology, geotechnical engineering. In those courses, we're typically taught to figure out maybe a design load, and we multiply it by like 3 to give ourselves a factor of safety. A bigger beam like this might cost us a little bit more, but it'll be safer. And this factor of safety mentality seeps through all of civil engineering, which makes sense when it comes to a culvert or a bridge or a building. But the factor of safety mindset does not make as much sense in transportation. Why? Well, Mother Nature doesn't care how big our beam is. It's not like it's going to get any windier. And same thing with like a culvert. Like the amount of rain is not really dependent on the size of that one culvert. But if we put a wider road in front of a human, they behave differently. If a human behaves the exact same on a narrow road as they do on a super wide road, it makes perfect sense that they're going to be safer because we give them, the factor of safety. But if they don't, there isn't a big enough band-aid to fix something like this. So we can do better. It's not this. And when I look at infrastructure like that, I'd say we're at best safety third. And even worse, we tell kids to bike to school on streets like this. Not only do we blame, one or the other of the road users when a crash happens, like in the case like this, we don't even record this crash in any database because it's a Doring crash. There was no moving vehicle involved, so this does not get into a typical engineering crash database. At the same time, there's no reason we can't build streets that look more like this. I guess there is a reason. Well, because a lot of the 1,000-page manuals that I was given as a young traffic engineer don't show us anything like that. So when we say we can't do anything but a facility like this, I mean, that is why the general public looks at traffic engineering oftentimes more like a religion than a science. As you can tell, I had a little fun using the AI image generator. Like this one was called The Sacred Art of Traffic Flow. But to be honest, most traffic engineers in their undergraduate years maybe take 1 or 2 transportation engineering courses. I took one. It didn't stop me from working in this field. It didn't stop me from getting a professional engineering license. In fact, the way civil engineering accreditation works is that you only need like sort of 4 subdisciplines of civil engineering. So some universities have 0 transportation courses and they're still accredited. Some professional engineers that are licensed traffic engineers have never ever taken a single transportation engineering course, let alone, one dedicated to road safety. Thus, when you think about it, it starts to make perfect sense why traffic engineers treat these books so reverently, because we don't often know any better, and we assume that whoever wrote them knows more than I do. We assume they did their homework. We assume that they're steeped in 100 years of science. And that's why I wrote my book, to show that a lot of those assumptions, when I went down those rabbit holes, were not even close to true. So if you take a look at the ITE forum, which is basically the pro-herb for traffic engineers, there is a debate raging about me in the book. What's both funny and to me a little sad is that the most fervent voices calling, for me to resign and stuff are also refusing to read the book. So, by sticking their heads in the proverbial sidewalk, they're basically proving my point. And they're going to keep building big streets like this with big clear zones because that's what the guidebooks tell them is safe. And that's what the theories tell them is safe. Even though there is empirical research out there, including by me, people like Eric Dumbaugh, like a lot of people showing that urban streets like this will kill far fewer people. And they're going to build big old turning radii that promote fast speeds because that is what our guidelines do. We know they're going to make things less safe for pedestrians, even though there's plenty of empirical research telling us that corners like this are far safer. And to sort of finish things up here, I have a hard time putting much stock into, a lot of the fancy new technologies that are coming to save the day if we can't even get the sidewalks right in a major city like Denver. And these are pictures I took myself in and around downtown Denver. And you can see in this one that you have a curb ramp, you have actually a bus stop up there, and nothing in between. And this is a connection we give folks to what is our multi-billion-dollar light rail investment. We build sidewalks that are too narrow for 2 people to walk side by side, which will force someone with a stroller or a wheelchair into the street. And if this guy gets hit by a car, the crash data is going to blame one road user or the other. So by no means am I trying to let bad behavior by road users off the hook. But by focusing on the so-called errors, it's useful for police, it's useful for insurance companies, but it's not useful for us. So instead of trying to place blame on road users, we need to take a step back and understand, where design, where engineering plays a role in the errors that cause the crash. In other words, ask why. Like, why is this person in the street? What can we do better? So to end with, I start my book off by comparing traffic engineers to doctors, because doctors have been around for 5,000 years. For the first 1,000 or so, you could easily make the case that they killed more people than they saved. But as an empirical science, they got better. Traffic engineering is only about 100 years old, and we're still in the stage where we're killing more people than we save. I'm just trying to have a little self-reflection so we can get back to being the empirical science we need to be to get better. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wes. Excellent. I wanted to remind everybody to use the Q&A function of Zoom. If you have any questions for Wes, we're gonna start a conversation here, and then we're gonna go to Q&A. Listening to what you're saying, it strikes me that the Complete Streets movement was even a bigger example of the declare bankruptcy thing that you talked about. I think there was something like 1,500 or 2,000 complete streets ordinances or laws passed in nearly every state of the country. And I've never seen any significant change in traffic engineering as a result of the complete streets laws that were passed. It just seems like they've continued on for the most part the same. I don't know what your observations are with those.
Yeah, I do think if you look at what the original Complete Streets people were saying was that we need to do a better job of accommodating and thinking about and designing for bikes and pedestrians and that sort of stuff. It's different than sort of how it was interpreted. And I think part of the reason is that Complete Streets word, where it was interpreted as we need to put, every type of mode in every type of street. So, if you look at Denver, for instance, like and I bike to work, one of the roads where they put a bike was on MLK Boulevard. And it is not the best place to bike, even with that bike lane. If you move over one or two streets, it's a much lower stress, much nicer environment. So a lot of times we're putting bicyclists in a bad situation instead of thinking about what is sort of best from a network perspective. So I think it was just a misinterpretation. Part of the reason is just that word complete streets make you think we need to throw every mode on every major road, which can lead us in the wrong direction if we're not thinking bigger picture.
In my review, which has gotten over 5,000 reads on Public Square, and I think that you've probably gotten some other, attention in far bigger platforms in Public Square. But I compare this to Donald Shoup's book, The High Cost of Free Parking, and which is sort of an ambitious comparison because that's been one of the most impactful books on the built environment over the last 20 years, if not the most. Don Shoup points out that the lack of common sense and science behind parking requirements. He also writes it in sort of an accessible, humorous style, but it's very academic. I mean, he really cites chapter and verse, goes back to the origins of where this came about, and really shows kind of, in many cases, the ridiculousness of parking requirements. And it's a book that has had an impact over a long period of time. And one of the reasons was I think that it empowered people who were not planners to challenge parking requirements and to say, look, this is really ridiculous. And can you defend them? If you can't defend them, I think that we need to reform them. And so over time, it has reformed parking requirements. Your book is it's very readable and accessible, but it's also highly academic. And what you do is really challenge the foundations of some of these practices, almost all practices in transportation engineering. And you're showing how the origins really don't hold up if you examine where they came from. Were you thinking of Donald Shoup as a model at all when you were writing this?
So, I mean, first of all, thank you for the amazing comparison to Donald Shoup and his book. Now, I will say my first like when I first got to UConn as a grad student, Norman was off on sabbatical, and he sort of handed me this project on parking. And I think as a young grad student, you're like, what, parking? Like, is that important? Like, who cares? And Norman also handed me a bunch of Donald Shoup's papers, and this is before the high cost of free parking came out. So I was deep in the weeds in Donald Shoup's work back in like 2004. So when his book finally came out, I'd already sort of read all those things, and but I think that influenced me in a lot of ways. Like that was sort of my first kind of real academic entrails. My first two papers were on parking. So and he's such a nice guy. He's been helpful, and he wrote a very nice blurb for the back of my book as well. So I don't think I was consciously trying to emulate him, but his style, and like it's a similar thing. I think a lot of the parking stuff, a lot of the engineers thought these were based in science. A lot of the planners thought those numbers came from somewhere, and he showed that they didn't. And I think it's the same case with a lot of the stuff that traffic engineers do. Like it's in these manuals. You assume that whoever wrote them did the homework, and a lot of times it turns out not to be true. So we're basing things on theory as opposed to empirical results. And instead of just relying on the theory, like maybe some of those theories are right, but I want to push us to be more self-reflective and to try to make sure, like, let's double check, like, because the people back then were clearly stating that they didn't know what they were doing, that they were just wanting to give something a try. And for whatever reason, like 10 or 20 years later, we sort of removed those caveats and we just kept whatever it was. And 30 years down the line, we even forget there was any caveats. Like, and that's sort of what I found that is similar to, I think, what Donald Shoup found is a lot of those numbers weren't nearly as scientific as we all were led to believe. So despite the title, I don't want to blame traffic engineers because they're just doing what they were taught. They're doing what these books say. And it's hard for them. They don't have the time to do what I did and dig into thousands of old journal articles to do something like this. So I'm trying to help. Yeah. So yeah.
To give kind of an example, like one thing that sticks in my mind was the painted lines on the roads. And you actually looked into, I mean, DOT spend millions of dollars a year, every one of them on repainting the lines on the roads. And you wanted to look into what is the scientific basis for that. And you found a couple of studies in the 1950s where they did real scientific studies. Does this improve safety or not? And they found out that no, it really doesn't improve safety. It actually, the accidents and the injuries increased when they painted the sides of the roads. And rather than look at that further, they just decided not to do any more studies and just continue what they were doing. So that was one that stuck in my mind. And also, some of the work that you talked about with street width. And you looked at what's the real origins of these these lane widths that we have that create this high injury network in every metro region in the country. Were you kind of surprised at sort of the lack of backing for a lot of these things, or is that what you expected to find?
Some of the, I mean, I found different things down different rabbit holes. Like with the Edgeline one was weird. So that was Ohio and Kansas. They did those Edgeline studies, the white lines on the side of like those rural highways, and they wanted to know if they were safe or not. So they actually did a real study, and the study was telling them that they made things less safe, but they went ahead and did them anyways. With like the lane width one and like street width in general. And I was always taught that wider roads were safer. Like that's what we were told, and we assumed like maybe we assumed there was some research pointing us to saying that was very true. And when I found those original studies, like there's a couple studies from like the 1930s, and one of them, like the first one, I think no, this might have been the third one. Like it was they compared 18 feet to 20 feet to 22 to 24. So the widest road in that study was 24 feet curb to curb, right? Which is narrower than any road we'd make today. And in that study, yes, 24 feet was safer than 18. And they made that point clearly. And we cited that paper and the two other papers that were very similar like that for like, again, 10 or 20 years, but then we stopped citing it. But the idea has persisted that wider roads are safer. So again, like maybe they are, but we can't base it just on those single studies. And, as I show, a lot of the newer research shows that there's not.
And those were like rural roads, weren't they? Studying, as opposed to like
Yeah.
a highly populated area. Um, so talking about it's a little bit more difficult talking about the solutions. I mean, this is a complicated problem, uh, and you sort of talked about a couple of different categories of solutions. One thing talked about was Jane Jacobs. You gave an example of Jane Jacobs, who was consulted by a traffic engineer in the early 1970s for building a new residential mixed-use area in Toronto from an industrial area. And she said, no, you're studying all the wrong things. You need to just go to the best neighborhood in Toronto's best neighborhoods, and then copy it and put it, and which is essentially what was done, is from my understanding, which is pretty amazing. So that's kind of the approach that new urbanists have taken. But then you have entire regions that have been, built according to dubious practices and sciences over the years. And how do you reform those? And you talk about the Marie Kondo approach, and I wanted you to like talk about that a little bit.
So, I mean, I'm trying, I mean, you've seen a lot of my research over the years, Rob, and I feel like I'm always sort of chipping away at the tip of the iceberg of all the things we're kind of doing wrong and could do better, showing that, empirically this is safer than this and we should be doing that. With this book, I was really trying to get more at the foundation, like to show that the foundation of a lot of what we do isn't nearly as strong as we were led to believe. Um, so instead of that whack-a-mole approach where we're just kind of looking for things that are relatively worse in terms of safety than others, the idea is to sort of rethink, because my book was already 400 plus pages, and originally it was, longer than Azkaban. I had to cut it down just for the sake of publishing. So there wasn't a ton of room to dive too deep into, kind of what we should be doing. So I was really just trying to set us on a fundamentally different path. And I came across the Marie Kondo idea of like how she cleans a house. And she said something to the effect of, if you're going room to room, like it's kind of like playing whack-a-mole. Like you never understand the scale of some of the problems you have. So she puts like all the clothes you own in one spot, and she deals with that category first. And it gives you a sense of not just the scale of the problem, but where you might be repeating your mistakes. And we don't do that. Like we sort of do this whack-a-mole approach. Instead, if we focus on a category, and the first one I talk about is like kids, like how do we make our city safer for kids? Like look to where they live, where they're going, look at schools, look at parks, look to design our roads differently. Like they're not going to walk 3.5 feet per second. They're going to meander across the street. Like, they can't be seen under the big cars. Like, so we need to make sure cars are further back from those corners near school. So we could kind of focus on that one category first and do all the things we need to do to make things safer for kids. And it gives us a fundamentally different way to do something like safe systems or Vision Zero, as opposed to just, trying to throw band-aids on things.
I want to get to some of the questions because we actually have some questions piling up in the Q&A. Matt Petty brings up the issue. What about aligning budget spending proportionately with mode share goals? Have you heard about that? Is that a way to approach this?
I try not to deal too much with sort of budget for the sake of this book. I mean, because a lot of times it's outside of the purview of a lot of traffic engineers. Like the interesting thing I always find is like for whatever reason we can never find the money to like fix the sidewalks or do the bike lanes, but we always have enough money to do a $10 million interchange or do a $1 billion highway expansion. So I think it's a matter of kind of aligning the pots, like the question is suggesting, to better match what our vision is. So that could work, but I didn't dig into whether it does or not.
We have a question from Jacob. How do we convince our traffic engineers and elected officials to give up speed and capacity for safety and equity?
Well, because one of the myths I try to dispel in the book is that a lot of the methods we use as traffic engineers, we assume safety is sort of embedded within that. So when we do things, planning for capacity, planning for speed, the thinking and like the early research made us believe that it was to make things safer. So by kind of pulling the curtain back and showing that those researchers weren't saying that, nor did they ever think that. So like in terms of like level of service, you kind of when you read how that came together, it sort of feels almost ad hoc. And they said at that time, we need to add safety to this, and they never did. So I think that is where we need to, understand. And this also speaks maybe to that myth that safety is our first priority, because it's not. Typically, it's capacity. Maybe speed second. Safety is not on the top two of most of those lists.
Um, Somebody asks, do you have any suggestions for similar books that you like, in addition to your book, that might be covering some of the same ground?
Um, I mean, I obviously read Chuck Marone's book, Confessions of a Recovering Engineer. I held off reading his book until after I was done. I didn't want to lean on it. So, and there's some good stuff in there. Angie Schmidt's book, right away. To tell you the book I really loved most recently, because I held off reading all these books till after I was finished writing mine. But Veronica Davis's Inclusive Transportation. It's not in the same vein. It's very different, but I found it to be really, really good. I love that book.
Well, that's pretty amazing that you actually held off on reading some of these books. Were you worried that you might be duplicating efforts, and did you think that you did, like reading Chuck's book?
And after I finished, I read Angie's book and Chuck's book sort of back to back, and I was very happy that they went off in different directions. I mean, there's some, a little bit of overlap, but I'm glad I held off because I went down my own crazy way, down a different path. And I'm happy with how it came out. So, and I was definitely happy to see that they did something different.
Hmm. A question from Paul. He said, please talk about the fifth E, which he says is equity.
Um, I've seen up to like 8, 9, 10 E's. So equity is important. I mean, especially in road safety, because we know there are disparities in terms of our road safety outcomes that, lower income populations, minority populations have worse safety outcomes. And one of the things I mentioned in the book is that as a researcher, when I'm doing a paper that looks at those sort of issues in terms of safety, I usually need to use a control variable, and control for like income or education or percent minority. And the thinking is that those neighborhoods are just automatically less safe. They maybe drive less safe cars. So that controls for those sort of issues. And I always have such a problem with that, because we know full well when you look at the types of built environments we give to those populations versus others, they are very different. Like there's a street here in Denver near my neighborhood called Montview, and through the Denver section, where it's richer, it's whiter, it's a beautiful street with giant trees, with medians, with bike lanes, with amazing sidewalks that are set back from the road with big green space in between. As soon as you cross into the lower income neighborhood, it becomes a 4-lane street instead of a 2-lane street. The bike lanes go away, the sidewalks shrink, there's no more trees. Now you have that 2-way turning lane in the middle. So just to kind of look at those things and say that to sort of blame those different populations for what they've been given, it's unfair to me. So we can definitely do a better job of accounting for equity, not just in the outcomes, but in the provision of transportation.
I talked to a real estate agent that I knew, would always like look in front of the house and see if there was a yellow line. And if there's a yellow line, automatically take a few $1,000s off the price of the house, because traffic would be moving faster in front of that house. Um, so it could go both ways. The design of the street might affect the value of the house, and vice.
Yeah, I was telling you earlier before we started, Rob, like when I was here for CNU in 2009, I knew I was moving here. So I was doing a house hunting trip during that same conference. So I was taking all the tours. And when I went around with a realtor and he was showing me um, a lot of houses on these major arterials. I was like, oh, we don't even need to go in. Like, I'm not going to buy this house. He's like, oh, maybe you'll love the inside. I'm like, it doesn't matter if I love the inside. I'm never going to buy a house on a street like this. Like, my focus is much more the neighborhood, the street, than it is the actual house. I'd rather have a seemingly worse house in a better neighborhood street. And he really could not get this through his head. And he kept doing it like 3 or 4 times. He kept bringing me to these houses on these bigger arterials. I'm like, oh my God, stop it.
So Marina Curry asks, what are the most progressive cities making the most revolutionary changes? We as planners need to have those examples to point to.
It's hard, I think, for engineers, though, to kind of hear those things. Like a lot of times we point to, Amsterdam and Copenhagen and places like this, and US engineers, like their eyes glaze over and they like, well, we're not them. And the same thing happens when I point out like Portland, Oregon or Boulder, Colorado. They're like, well, we're not Boulder. Like we can't do that. So I think you need to account for sort of culture to some extent. Like I did my sabbatical in Australia in 2017. And even though Australia is doing a lot of the same things those European countries were doing, US engineers, for whatever reason, felt that we're maybe more culturally similar to Australia. So when I show what they're doing, they're like, oh, like maybe we could do that. And I think the same thing happens with a city like Denver. Like we're doing things here on the street that I thought were a moonshot 10 years ago. Um, and other cities, like, let's say you're Charlotte, and if I tell you what Boulder's doing, you're like, yeah, we can't do that. But if I show you what Denver's doing, like, oh, maybe we can do that. So I think you just need to be careful instead of like pointing out which exact cities, just try to think through trying to find a city that is more of a match. And because there are a lot of cities doing good things that maybe would work better in terms of trying to get those points across.
What do you think about the Florida context-sensitive design guidelines or design um, rules, I guess?
Um, I do talk about those in the book a little bit. I know, I think it was at CNU in Louisville, like Billy Hadaway and we hosted one of the CNU. They did a podcast series there. He and I hosted that one, and I was sort of questioning it. I think a lot of new urbanists were thinking, "Oh, this is a great step in the right direction." At the same time, like if you look at the design of the street, like they have like a bike lane and they have the sidewalk there, and they call this the clear zone. Like for a traffic engineer, what's the definition of a clear zone? Well, it's the space we want out of control drivers and cars to recover. And we're overlapping that space with where we want bikes and peds. Like to me, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Like we need to provide a safer place. So, um, it might be better than what they have before, but I still don't think it makes sense in terms of maybe the goals we're shooting for in terms of safety.
Lawrence Auerbach said, well, thank you, Wes, first of all. And you cover many baseless or poorly supported guidelines in the book. Do you feel that some are more useful for advocates to use, while others are more directed towards engineers to think about?
I mean, thanks, LJ. Good question. I mean, I try to write it in a way that could help both. Like I want to feel like I'm enlightening the engineers, and I'm sure some of this stuff they already know, some of this stuff might be new to them. At the other end, I want to educate advocates, the public, planners, people in other sort of sub-disciplines that relate to this to sort of give them enough information. Maybe ammunition's not the right word, but to be able to maybe effectively argue with an engineer and maybe point out that there isn't as much science or there isn't as much truth behind these things being standards, or like the fact that they have a lot more leeway than maybe they make it seem to use engineering judgment.
We got a question. How could you make a Vision Zero safe streets for all plans be better? There was criticism of that, but how can they become effective?
I mean, if you think big picture, like we know what we should do. Like we should never allow a car to go over 20 in any place there might be pedestrians or bicyclists. Like we know how the data works in terms of the danger but we're not willing to do that. So like even though the idea behind Vision Zero is supposed to be a moral change, Like, we're just not willing to do that. So we could do these things to make the road safer, but a lot of times we won't. I mean, so there's a school like right off of Federal Boulevard, not too far from here. It's an elementary school. It's like one block off of Federal Boulevard, and the school zone ends right behind Federal Boulevard, and that's the most dangerous street in this city. And we're just couldn't be bothered to extend the school zone through what is a street that we deem too important for car traffic, even though we know kids are crossing right at that crosswalk right next to it. I have pictures of them. So it part of it's political will, part of it is engineers fear reliability, and I show ways that I think engineers can get past that, but it sort of all has to come together. It can't be any single one thing.
Um, we have Jennifer, who's a traffic engineer, and she said, as a traffic engineer who cares deeply about safety and is bought in on the thoughtful approaches you're talking about, she's concerned that we're going to lose people in the traffic engineering industry by outright blaming them and writing them off simply because they're traffic engineers. Do you have thoughts on how we can have these conversations with our peers that leads them to change their minds and join this movement?
Well, I last week I was up in Montana at the Mountain District IT Institute of Transportation Engineering Conference. I sort of gave my first presentation on kind of some of these topics to a room full of transportation traffic engineers. And when they see it, when they hear me talk about like some of those examples of crashes that we blame on human error, but are really something we need to be more self-reflective about, they agree. Like, it's hard for them not to. And I think they're to me, it's an exciting time, not like one where we need to vilify them. And if you read the book, I'm not doing that. I'm, despite the title, I'm trying to say it's not their fault. Like, they're doing what they were given, they're doing what we were taught. But if we do shift to become more of an empirical science, there is so much new room for like me as a researcher, for you as a practitioner, to create better and safer places. So it's an exciting time. And I think part of it is we need a different type of engineer. I talk a little bit about how we need more generalists than specialists. We need people that can not only understand the design of a road, but how it impacts the communities around it, or how it impacts people that, may have childcare or older adult dude. Like, there needs to be bigger picture thinking. And by opening up sort of the gates and doors to transportation engineering to a broader set of people, I think it's more opportunity than something that's going to keep people away.
Here's a topic that you really talked a lot about in the book, but Tim asks, can you speak to the impact of traffic impact analysis on poor roadway design? He's been involved in one or two that say to maintain an acceptable level of service, build a giant intersection with slip lanes.
Well, I talk about, I mean, it is a requirement for any sort of site engineering project you might do. At the same time, again, there is not much science behind like that being a need. And for whatever reason, we don't ever ask for like a road impact safety analysis. Like, what would be the difference in terms of safety outcomes if we do X versus Y versus Z? Since we don't, no city ever asked for that, no university like mine ever teaches that. I mean, most traffic engineers would have a hard time even answering that question. So, part of it is like, what gets measured gets managed, and we're measuring capacity, we're measuring delay, we're measuring congestion. We're not often thinking about safety. We're not often thinking about something becoming a barrier for a kid getting to school or for whatever it might be. So if we sort of ask the right questions, I think we'll get a much better chance of getting the right answers.
Hannah in Ann Arbor says that they have several stroads, including one like Washington Avenue. I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly, but it's controlled by MDOT, and a bicyclist was hit this past Friday and is in critical condition. As the state does not maintain the road and provide any safety features. Generally speaking, why does this state not allow the city to take over roads like this? What does this problem look like nationally?
I know, like, when I was a consultant up in like New England, there's a lot of these sort of small New England town centers where a state highway runs through it. So they couldn't sort of do what they wanted to in terms of the type of street that sort of looks like it could be a Norman Rockwell painting, but then you have a state highway running through it. There are a lot of places, including in Colorado, where the cities are taking over those roadways, and with that comes taking over oftentimes the maintenance or the plowing or whatever else it might be. So that is happening in a lot of places. At the same time, to me, there's no reason why these state DOTs can't prioritize safety more than they do now. So just switching control to the cities, it feels again like a band-aid. Like we can do better. Like we can have the engineers at these state DOTs actually respect the context and the place where their streets are. Because I mean, a lot of our big streets should change their character as they get into a city, as they move through a city, and then again as they leave the city. But it's a lot easier for an engineer to use the same cross section through that whole stretch. We can do better.
Dustin Black, who appears to have read your book, says one of his criticisms is the heavy reliance on traffic quarterly issues. Why was this the selected primary resource, and do you think it is landing with the audience the way you intended?
So the reason is I really wanted to get my information from like a first person voice instead of reading about people saying about what happened. I wanted to hear it from them themselves. So when I was looking at what my options were for this, that was the main traffic engineering journal of the time. I mean, I went through a lot of other resources, but that one provided a great longitudinal look at what the traffic engineers were saying through sort of the important years that I was looking at. So, I think anytime you're pulling the curtain back on something, like you need to kind of see the person on the other side. Like the image of the Wizard of Oz is powerful if you never see that it's just one man behind it. So I was trying to kind of point out what was typically the men behind a lot of what we're doing and sort of name them, call them by first name, bring them out to the light. And there wasn't really another way to do that. So that is sort of why I went that direction. At the same time, in terms of whether it's landing or not, I mean, I did the best I could. I'm happy with the book. So hopefully people, I mean, a lot of the feedback I'm getting has been super positive. So that is good. So yeah, we'll see like what it becomes. I mean, if I would, best case scenario, it's somewhere maybe not anywhere near Donald Shoup's book in terms of impact, in terms of long-term impact, but I try to write something that was more fundamental, that wasn't just something that is useful today and will be useless in 2 years from now. I wanted something that, speaks to the kind of bigger picture issues. That was my goal.
We only have time for another question or so. But a couple of questions deal with fire marshals, and they say, how do you deal with fire marshals asking for 20 feet of asphalt? Will your next book be called Killed by a Fire Marshal?
It could be. I mean, I think I know, some of the engineers. I was talking to one that works for Tool Design, and Denver last summer was putting in these sort of traffic circles in the neighborhoods, like to help out with creating more of a network in terms of our bikeways, things like that. He was telling me he had literally drew it on the pavement, like the circle, and he had the fire truck come out and test it. So he has a video of them taking this corner. They ended up building it like the next day. They built it in half a day. It was amazing how quickly they put that thing in. A couple weeks later, there were other fire officials complaining about this design, asking them to rip it out. And they're like, no, like, look, we tested your fire truck on it. So like letting them, it feels more like tactical urbanism, like letting them see it, letting them feel it, letting them try something like here's how narrow it could be, here's how wide. I heard the same thing. I remember Elizabeth McDonald came to the CNU Transportation Summit in Boulder, and she had just written the Boulevard book. And one of the things she said is that on the Octavia Boulevard, the fire marshal, after they had put it in, they said we could have gone narrower on those access lanes. And they were pushing for that earlier, but fire marshal was against it until they actually used it and tried it. So again, design is iterative, and if we can test things and move in the right direction, that should work better.
It seems to me that if the traffic engineers were more on board with this, that the fire marshals would be less of a barrier. It's difficult to getting through all of these barriers, especially if the primary people who are designing the streets are not on board.
If you look at the data, the percent of fires that most fire, I know in Denver, I think it was 3% of the calls they come to are fires. Like far greater percentage are actually traffic crashes, right? So if we're building unsafe streets to help them get to fight, I don't know. At the same time, you look at any of the streets that were built before traffic engineers ever came along, like including like Acorn Street in Boston that you saw at the very beginning before I put my presentation up. If there's a fire there, the fire truck's gonna figure out a way to get there, and that happens in every city. All those old neighborhoods where the streets are too narrow, given our current guidelines, the fire trucks get there.
Well, Wes, this has been a pleasure. We have to call call an end to this, but I'm going to remind folks that this will be on YouTube, or it'll be posted on the CNU website and YouTube probably within a day. We have plenty more questions to answer. I wish we could get to them. Maybe would it be possible to send some of these to you and see if you could answer them in time?
Sure. I'm also doing a Reddit Ask Me Anything on Thursday, so people are welcome to join that and ask me questions there too.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Wes. This was great. Thanks for everybody for attending and the great conversation.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, everybody.
Okay. Take care.